Sonic Jam.
Sonic Jam hit the SEGA Saturn in the summer of 1997, which was sadly near the end of its life cycle. The game remains one of the most incredible and absolute best compilation titles ever released, and it's often overlooked by many SEGA Saturn owners simply because it's so hard to find these days. Sonic Jam contains all three original Genesis or Mega Drive Sonic the Hedgehog games, plus Sonic and Knuckles, which technically would be like Sonic 4. And you can actually attach, using the lock-on feature, you can attach Sonic and Knuckles to all three of the original Sonic games, just like you could back in the day with the real carts. And doing so unlocks a whole bunch of goodies. For this first Sonic game, you unlock Blue Sphere. For Sonic 2, you unlock Knuckles as a playable character through the game. And for Sonic 3, well, basically what happened was Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles were co-developed simultaneously. They were originally intended to be one and the same game, so that's essentially what you do when you combine Sonic 3 with Sonic and Knuckles. You see, Sonic 3 features Sonic and Tails going through the adventure, and Sonic and Knuckles, if you play it by itself, is Sonic and Knuckles going through their own adventure. So by combining two games, you actually can play Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles all together in one extremely long game, and it makes for a much more fleshed out experience, and it's awesome being able to play as all three characters. And something else I really enjoyed with this compilation is that you now have the ability to save your game regardless of which game you're actually playing, which obviously wasn't an option in the earlier games. And if that wasn't enough, Sonic 1 also allows you to use the Spin Dash, baby! You just have to make sure it's turned on from the options menu before you boot the game. And I thought that was a brilliant touch. And a couple of the bugs from all three games have been ironed out, especially with Sonic 3. And there's also been some new audio effects that have been added in for good measure. Each of the four included games also has several difficulty settings. Original allows you to play the games as, well, they originally were on the Genesis, and then there's a normal mode which actually makes the game a little bit easier than the originals. It tweaks some of the levels and adds more coins here and there. I meant rings. And then there's the easy mode, which is like a total cakewalk. You can actually beat the final boss of Sonic 3 with 3 hits. It's that easy. And not only that, there's invincibility boxes all over the place, rings everywhere, and well, it's just a total joke. And finally, you have a time attack mode, which is pretty cool. It's for those that really like blasting through the different stages, and your top 3 times in each act are saved to the Saturn's internal memory. But perhaps the most interesting history lesson I can give you guys is that Sonic Jam doesn't actually emulate the 4 Sonic games. Those games were actually ported over to the Saturn itself, and that means that real thought and effort went into this compilation. I especially loved how Sonic Team went back and made just minor graphical tweaks during the development. For example, if you run and come to a screeching halt in Sonic 1, you'll see a little dust trail behind Sonic, and that was introduced later on in the series. And I love that. I love little things like that, because they're just awesome. Now, because the games were ported, there are a couple of new issues that have surfaced. Things like some weird audio glitches that pop up if there's just too many sounds on the disc at one particular point in time. And then there are also a couple of instances where I noticed some slowdown that I don't remember being in the original game, although that could just be me. Although then there's the flip side where there was slowdown in certain areas has been removed for this one. So, you know, there's a little bit of a give and take with that. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with this disc is a whole new mode called Sonic World mode. And this is what people were the most excited about when the game was new. You can think of this mode sort of like a 3D hub, where you run around in full 3D, obviously, as Sonic. You collect rings, jump on platforms, you can even find Tails. There's useless checkpoints, you just hear the sound. And just, you know, pretty much you can do anything you could do in a normal Sonic game, but in this one little 3D hub. And what's neat is there are a couple of time trial challenges which unlock the game's credits for completing them, which is kind of weird, but okay. And the real focus of the 3D hub was to show off what Sonic would look like in 3D, even though technically that's what Sonic Extreme was all about, which, if you're interested in that game, I have a really interesting feature up on the SEGA Saturn playlist, so be sure to check that out. You gotta love shameless plugs. Anyway, the purpose of Sonic World is sort of like the extra features on a Blu-ray or a DVD. There are a series of buildings in the hub that you can access that have a wealth of really fantastic extra goodies. There is a character house, which has bios for all the characters, both good and bad, and there's also concept art stills in there and much more. There's also a music shop, which actually isn't a store at all, but it's where you can listen to all the sound effects and background music from all 4 included games, plus naturally Sonic Jam. There's also a Hall of Fame building, which is where you can get a nice history lesson on Sonic from the very first game all the way up until 1997, or this game. Plus there's a lot of info on Sonic related goods, such as the giant Sonic float at Macy's one year and more. It's all really interesting, and it's truly appreciated that Sonic Team went the extra mile. There's also an art gallery which contains, again, a wealth of really nice looking high resolution pictures of Sonic and the gang doing all kinds of wacky stuff. And then finally we come to the movie theater, which is actually one of the most interesting bonus features on the game, as it contains a wealth of video content showing off Japanese Sonic commercials, like a cartoon snippet, and just everything else you could possibly imagine. It's unbelievable. For the asking price of $60, which is what this game went for back in the day, there was just so much content on this disc. It's insane. With there only being 3 Sonic games released on the Saturn during its unfortunate short lifetime, this is hands down my favorite one. The other 2, Sonic 3D Blast and Sonic R, are mostly forgettable to me personally. Sonic Jam was in a league all of its own and remains one of my favorite compilation titles ever released. True love and care was put into the development of this game, and man does it show. From the little touches made to the classic games to the incredible additional content, Sonic Jam is a must-have for any Sega Saturn owner. Unfortunately, this was the last time the original Sonic games would be ported to any system. After this, Sega would simply emulate the games on newer hardware or as part of a different compilation game, and they would never be quite as good as these ports in my opinion. That makes this game in very high demand, and since it was released in mid-1997, it can be extremely hard to find, at least the North American version. Couple that with the newfound popularity of the Sega Saturn system itself, and you have the recipe for one expensive game. A complete in-box copy typically goes for around $100 these days on eBay, and prices are likely to continue to rise as time passes. Now, considering how unique this game is though, and all the content you get on the disc, I say this one is actually worth the asking price. Naturally, if you can snag it for cheaper, don't question it, take the plunge, because it's totally worth it. They just don't make games like this anymore, especially compilation games.